Hey, everybody, welcome back to the I Play 2 podcast. I'm your host, Rob Adler. This week, Broadway actress Nikka Graff Lanzarone joins the show. She has appeared in Chicago, where she's played the role of Velma Kelly, and she's also appeared in The Devil Wears Prada and Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. Also, Nikka has co-hosted podcasts such as Only Slightly Dead Inside and The Ensemblist, and she is a board member for the Actors Equity Foundation, a nonprofit which promotes and invests in the theater and the performing arts. Her mother, Ilene Graff, played the role of Marcia Owens, the wife of Bob Uecker's character on Mr. Belvedere, and also played the role of Sandy in the original Broadway production of Grease. And her father, Ben Lanzarone, was a composer and pianist whose music has been heard on TV shows like Dynasty, Happy Days, and The Love Boat. Nikka, welcome to the show.
Oh my God, hi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay, other than the very loud construction outside the apartment building. We're doing all right.
How did your interest in Broadway and musicals come to be?
Well, not just my parents, who you so lovingly introduced, but my entire family is in show business. My cousin Randy Graff is a Tony Award winner, and my uncle Todd Graff is a child actor turned adult actor turned screenwriter director. My grandfather, Jerry Graff, was one of the great studio singers. Pretty much anything you'll hear on like the oldies station or however long ago, now that that's the oldies station, he's singing backup on that and had vocal groups. And like other cousins who've done Broadway shows, and very much the family business, and very much not something that anybody was like, you can't make a living doing this, because they were all making a living doing this. So it was always kind of there, and it was always kind of interesting to me and something that I really loved. And I am a dancer, so that's kind of the only thing I do differently than everybody else is I'm a dancer. So it was always around, like the idea of being in the entertainment industry in some way.
How has the entertainment industry, I would say, changed from when, let's say, your parents and your uncle broke in compared to when, let's say, you and your cousins have broken into it?
I am kind of the only one in my generation. I have another cousin on my dad's side of the family, actually, who is an incredible singer and performer. And so she's kind of my only age contemporary. So it was much different. Not to say that there was less competition. There weren't fewer people trying to do the thing, because the thing I always say is, since the Greeks, there have always been more people who wanted to be in the play than there were spots in the play for the people. And that is just something we all have to accept. But I think it was, I don't want to say it was easier, but there are things about it that were definitely easier. So the proliferation of college level musical theater programs, that sort of feeder system wasn't so much a thing then as it is now. And there were more summer stock theaters than there are now. And there were just sort of more opportunities to do different things and more ways to get those jobs, I think, than there are now.
I ask this because I had Javon McFerrin on, who was in Hamilton a while back. Is actors and actresses now seem to have to train for every role, where it seems prior generations only had to train for one, maybe two roles?
That's a really great way in. So I have done over my career a lot of, I call them revisicals. So like small cast revivals of shows that were once casts of 50. So I've done the production of Sweet Charity off Broadway in 2016. That is a massive company of people. We did it with 12, all of us, all inclusive. And right before the shutdown, I was doing a similar revisical of The Unsinkable Molly Brown, which I think we had 15. So this was like casts of 50 with singing choruses and dancing choruses down to 15 humans who have to do the same amount of work. So the workload that's expected of us, I think, is wildly different than the workload that was expected of when my parents were coming up. And we all have to be able to cover. We all have to be able to play the roles that we are learning and that we are covering on top of doing a full ensemble track. Track is like your entire role in the show. So any other role that you play is part of your track, but that can be 5 or 6 roles over the course of a single show. So that I think is different, is the expectation of ability.
In one show, you're playing role A, another show, you're playing role B. How do you keep all of that straight to be able to prepare all those different roles?
It's not necessarily in one show you're playing one thing, one show you're playing another thing, unless you are a swing. So a swing is a member of the ensemble of a show whose job it is to cover all of the ensemble roles in the show. So if somebody in the ensemble has to step into a principal role that they cover, somebody else has to step in and cover everything else that that person does. So that includes the specialties and any features that you might have in your ensemble track. But some people feel strange about the term track, but I do not. So your track in a show is every single thing you do in the whole show, top to tail. That might include several different roles, playing several different characters throughout that, but the whole entire thing is like if you were to put yourself on the Haunted Mansion track and go through the ride, that's the ride. It's rehearsal and it's being open to things changing minute to minute, and it's being able to pick things up quickly and solve problems really quickly on the fly, and being able to think 3 or 4 steps ahead about what is best for the good of the show that day.
At any point, I know improv comedy is not what you do, but did you ever take any improv comedy classes or anything like that to help you prepare for this?
Improv makes me want to run screaming.
So how do you prepare for the memorization of all the different roles? Like, do you have memorization techniques or anything? Or is it just one of those that you're just able to learn the role and go?
The memorization piece of it is almost secondary. As long as you understand what's going on in your rehearsal process, what you're supposed to say and do will seep in. And yes, like if you have big speeches and stuff, you have to go home and you have to learn things. And especially if you're doing a new show where you are rehearsing one version of something during the day and performing another version of something at night, keeping all of that stuff in your head is just like spinning plates and hoping that nothing falls. But it's rehearsal, and having adequate rehearsal time and being able to do things more than once, which is great. But my memorization techniques are just like rote beating it into my brain. I'll write things out in my hand because it's always easier to remember things if you're writing every single word down, like all of the same stuff that you learn with and study with, and anything that has like worked for you in any other situation will probably find its way to working for you in this kind of a situation too.
This may not be necessarily a favorite role, but what was a role you had to work hardest at to become successful in a show?
What a great question. Anything that's new, it's always about adjusting your expectations kind of immediately. So a lot of that work is more like internal work on yourself and on having a strong enough sense of self to be okay with things that you loved doing getting cut because they don't serve the show, or either having to do things that you weren't necessarily sure of doing, or not being able to do things that you thought that you would be able to do. That kind of working hard is much harder to me than physical work, because you can do all of the push-ups to make yourself strong enough to lift the other people. But sometimes like being okay with what the show ends up being is harder.
Well, I would agree. I used to do documentary work, and there would be a line or two, or somebody's quote would be cut. And it's like, what are you doing? You can't lose that line. And rather than fighting it, you're like, okay, whatever, let's just move on. It just makes things simpler.
Exactly. And now I've done so much new work and so much developmental work at this point where it's like, I'm attached to nothing. Great if it happens. Oh, well, if it doesn't end up in the show. Oh, well, if I don't end up in the show. It just rolls off you.
Who was whether it be a teacher, a professor, a coach, that you've had that's really impacted you, that's taught you lessons on how to be successful on and off Broadway?
I'm thinking specifically of a couple of people. One, his name was Michael Larson. I went to Stage Door Manor Theater Camp in the Catskills of New York in the summers of my junior high school summers. And Michael was just a force for all of us. There's not a person who went to camp when he was there and teaching who wasn't deeply impacted by him. His expectations of us were no different than what anybody in the outside world would have expected of us. Our age didn't matter. How much time we had to learn something didn't matter. It was just expected of us that we would get things done, and we would get them done to a level that was acceptable to him, which was the highest possible level. And so learning from someone like that at such a young age really sets the tone of how I approach working now and learning now. And I think I had a lot of teachers who were like that, where it didn't matter that we were children. It mattered that we got things done to a really high level and that we didn't act like children, that we acted like professionals. And if you want to do this, this is what you have to do. And I think that served me, I think, more than anything.
Sounds like there was no judgment there. More of, here's what it is, here's what you got to do. If you don't like it, go somewhere else.
And then sometimes you'll be like, wait a minute, that's not at all what the real world is like.
Growing up, what were some of the lessons that your parents taught you, your mom from the acting side, your dad from the musical side, that have helped you along the way in your career?
Not to take anything personally, I think, was the biggest, because my mom is a brilliant actor and an incredible singer. She still, to this day, sounds exactly the same, and I don't know how she does it. But from my parents, nothing about this is really ever about you. You could be walking, you don't know what kind of day somebody else is having. You don't know if you remind them of someone they hate. You don't know if they have been really sick of one kind of vocal quality that you just have that they can't bear to listen to anymore. Everything is so subjective. It's like you're special, but you're not special. But not letting that affect the type of work you're putting into whatever it is, that you're doing this work, you are practicing, you are learning, you are growing for yourself and not for some sort of expected result other than your own next benchmark.
I think that's a lesson that a lot of us take a lot of time to learn, sometimes some people longer than others, but I think that's incredibly true of the phrase, it's not personal, it's just business.
That's my father always used to say, like, it's called show business. It's not show friends. And not in a like reality show, I'm not here to make friends kind of way, just in a like, the only thing you can control is yourself kind of way.
I know you've performed with your mom before at various points. Is there any added pressure for you to be performing with her?
Oh my God. Yeah, of course. We also did like a full Graff family holiday spectacular about 10 years ago. Did like a big holiday show with me and my cousin Randy and my Uncle Todd and my mom. So it is, of course, pressure to be kind of just like at her level, even though we are wildly different people. We sound incredibly different when we sing. Our senses of humor are different. Our tastes are different, but there is so much about us that is so similar that it's like trying to like match those things to just be able to be on stage.
Is there a favorite moment or memory that stands out from that family performance?
Honestly, my very favorite thing we did in that concert was our encore. It was like a whole thing, and it was all of us, and it was props, and it was comedy, and it was an hour and a half of complete foolishness. But our last number, we all put our microphones down, we sat on a stool, and we sang Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas in really tight harmony, a cappella, with no amplification. And that's like as close as I've ever felt to everyone else in my family, was being able to make that happen.
I hope you have a recording of that somewhere where you can go watch to lift yourself up maybe on a bad day.
That's a great idea.
So, growing up, who were some of the idols or actors or actresses that you looked up to outside of your own family?
Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner, obviously. From a very, very young age, it was as many Mel Brooks movies as could possibly be played in front of me. That was like sacred text is Mel Brooks. The score of West Side Story is sacred text in my family. All That Jazz has been my favorite movie since I was 7 years old. So I've always been obsessed with people like Sandal Bergman, all of the original Fosse dancers. Those were people that, even when I was like taking adult jazz classes as a teenager, and a lot of those people would be in those classes, and I would just like not be able to contain myself. Like, I cannot believe I am standing in these rooms with these people doing the same choreography. Like, I'm going to die. Who else was I obsessed with? I was obsessed with Victor Borge. So just like musical comedy, as much musical comedy as I possibly could get.
My mom were still around. She would love to hear that you liked Victor Borge. She absolutely loved him.
That was my first concert.
That's awesome. What's your favorite memory of that concert?
I was like 7, so I don't know, but I have a joke in my show, in the show Liza with the Z parody, that for my 7th birthday, I asked for 2 things: an agent and tickets to a Victor Borge concert. And I got the tickets to a Victor Borge concert.
And the agent, you had to wait till you were 9?
Oh God, no, I begged and begged and begged to be a child actor, and my parents would not have any of it. It's like all I wanted to do was just like work from the time I knew that it was possible to work. And they were like, no, no.
They started at a fairly young age, and they probably knew some of the pitfalls associated with child acting.
Absolutely. And also, I think they didn't want to drive me to auditions. They were like, when you can drive yourself to auditions, you can go. I'm not driving you to Santa Monica at 4 o'clock.
I can't blame them for that. I've been to LA traffic a few times. That's not fun.
Yeah, no, I'm still waiting.
I love Mel Brooks. For you, what's a role in one of his movies that you really enjoy watching time after time after time?
Oh, God. I mean, History of the World, that might be the movie I have seen the most times, because that is just a cavalcade of legends all doing absolutely foolish things in their own way, being brilliant at the things they're brilliant at. Like a movie like that, that's also like split up into a lot of different sections, is such a masterclass in different styles of comedy and the ways to craft something that might be very serious into something that is completely foolish and hilarious, and to let the people around you be as brilliant as they are doing the things that they are the most brilliant at. So you can isolate any 10 minutes of that movie and learn something.
The Inquisition musical part is just fantastic.
Yes, absolutely. That's like, how do you do a send up of Busby Berkeley and of other big movie musicals? And also the way that his brain works is remarkable.
And one of his movies, I don't think that gets enough credit because it's not played as often as History of the World Part 1 or Blazing Saddles, etc. Is High Anxiety. That movie is fantastic.
That is fantastic. There are a couple of like weird little family jokes that all come from that. Weird family joke that we have is from the 12 Chairs when he goes, God, you're so strict.
That is a great bit. To me, it's true comedy genius because it's not a lot of slapstick that he normally did. It's a higher level of comedy that you have to get all the references.
Totally. But anytime there's something that has just been like, why is this as hard as it is? It is always, you're so strict.
And you also mentioned All That Jazz, which I have to admit I've only seen once, and I'm not sure I could actually tell you a lot about it. So for you, what makes it your all-time favorite movie?
Oh my God. Where do we start? I am looking off to the left because my friend Eric found for me and like out of nowhere gave me an original poster. And it's the thing I see when I walk in the door. So the opening sequence of that movie gives me a feeling that is only matched by watching the original production of a chorus line on the Tony Awards in 1976, which is on YouTube. It is a feeling I almost do not have words for because of the attention to detail while still allowing people to dance like people and not like robots. That there's not a frame that hasn't been thought about and thought all the way through, but there's just something in the placement of a hand and in what it means to be moving like they're moving. Just watch the opening 10 minutes of all that jazz, and it's visceral. I'm not explaining it well, and I don't know if I can.
I do know the first 10 minutes, and I understand what you're saying. And for me, visceral moments in movies, whether we're talking the birds flying at you, or the music in Jaws, or the first romance scene in Casablanca, there are just those moments that resonate that you can talk to people from multiple generations, and they all know exactly what you're saying.
Exactly.
Have you ever watched the movie 0 Hour, which is a really bad horror movie, side by side with Airplane?
No.
It's almost like a frame for frame remake.
Whoa. I am not a horror person in the slightest, mostly because I don't need to do any extra work to get my nervous system there. So I don't understand wanting to feel like that. I feel like that all the time.
Since you mentioned that, you hosted a podcast right around the pandemic called Only Slightly Dead Inside, which talks a little about anxiety and depression.
That podcast was my co-host, Julianne. That was her brainchild. I write frequently about mental health and about kind of what it means to like have depression. It looks a million different ways. It does not only mean somebody is in a depressive state and all of the things that you think of when you think of somebody having depression. It is a million things. And the more it is normalized that this is a thing you have, the more nuance you can bring to it. And the same thing with anxiety. She was sort of the more anxiety person, and I was sort of the more depression person. But like, you still have to get stuff done, even if you're medically sad. So what does it mean to be like medically sad? And both of our experiences with finding medication and with being in therapy and whatever it means to be functional, and how it doesn't necessarily like take away from living a full life. It is just something extra that happens.
One of the things with depression, and I think we all battle it at some point along the way, is when you're talking to somebody and they say, well, you need to go talk to someone about it. I'm like, yeah, that's why I'm talking to you about it.
Except sometimes you need a neutral third party who has advanced degrees in learning how to listen to this.
Sometimes it also helps to have someone who knows you, not just on a professional level, but on a personal level, that might be able to provide some insight that a neutral third party can't always give.
Totally. And I'm spoiled rotten because my therapist for a long time did Broadway shows and was still very sort of active in the New York theater community. And so once I finally started seeing him, there was a level of understanding that helped jump me over a whole bunch of levels that we could get into more things more quickly because he understood the parties involved. There was a lot I didn't have to explain to him, which I found wildly helpful, but also neutral third party.
How recent of a phenomenon is theater psychology and people going to go see maybe a therapist like you do that has a background on stage?
I mean, I'm thinking off the top of my head, at least 5 people I know who did Broadway shows for a long, long time have transitioned into being therapists. So there is, I think, a lot in common with needing to be able to take in a lot of information, needing to be able to see what somebody is going through and being empathetic and being open. And there's some overlap, I think, with being a therapist.
For you in your career, what was a big mental hurdle that you had to clear with depression so that way you could get to the next level and get to higher heights?
The idea of levels to me, I have a hard time with, because being open to whatever work it is that excites you or work that you just have to do is, I don't know, I kind of just want to like horizontalize all the power structures, but that's a different podcast. And that in and of itself, I think, is a big mental hurdle. So I seem to have achieved this thing over here that on paper looks like it means something huge, but also I am doing this other thing over here afterwards that may seem like in a traditional career path. I feel like there is no step down or step up, especially in the theater. It is just about, if you're lucky enough to be able to do work that excites you, then that's the win right there. And also at this point, like, I've played roles and I've done a lot of ensemble work and gone back and forth between those two things in a way that I think now we do much more often. But there used to be kind of more stigma attached to that. That like once you started playing roles, you would never stop. Like you would never audition for the ensemble of something. And that's like never how I've wanted to operate. So I think that's actually one of the bigger mental hurdles, is understanding that there kind of are no steps. You're skipping stones more than you're taking steps up or down, which helps to, I think, open your mind to what is available to you that might feed you in a way that you never thought. Maybe it's that. Maybe that's the thing.
There are times I do a podcast where I'm like, oh, this is going to get ratings or this is going to get listeners, and it doesn't. And the flip side is I do a podcast and I'm like, I'm not sure the content is as good as I would have liked, but then all of a sudden everyone listens. And so there's no rhyme or reason to figure it out. How do you kind of balance that in the theater world where you do a show and you're like, oh, this is going to be great, and then no one's here? And then you do something, you're like, maybe this is my best role. Wait, it's a sellout.
Yeah. I have been there a few times. Obviously, there's no magic formula for anything. You just never know what's going to connect with people, especially if you're creating work, because the way something is received is so hit or miss at all times. It's just putting out something that you like, and chances are somebody else will connect with it. Chorus Line is my favorite musical, and the thing that I talk about loving about it so much is it is in the specificity of the storytelling that actually makes it a universal story. So if you're going for something that ends up being a little more generic, you may not be able to touch as many people as you would have with something more specific. But emotionally, it's a roller coaster all the time when you're like, this is going to be the great thing, and then it tanks, or this is definitely the show that's going to go, and then something happens and it doesn't go. That is just part of building resilience.
What's a role that you did at any level, whether it's growing up, college, as a professional, that you thought, I don't know if this is totally going to connect with the audience, that the audience overwhelmingly responded positively?
In this off-Broadway production of Sweet Charity, which is one of the most fulfilling things I have ever done in my career, probably because every single one of us had to play 5,000 roles because we were all we had. It's a one scene part, and I was just doing like a funny send up of my aunts and uncles in the Catskills kind of voice on it. And that one scene got bigger laughs than everything else I did in the show that was like built for more laughs. And it just always made me really happy that this stupid one scene where I'm doing like a ridiculous Catskill comic kind of accent.
And the rush from that, like, how do I recreate this?
You can't. Also, sometimes the writing just asks for something. You can only do what the writing is asking you to do.
But you never know whether it's a gesture, a facial expression, something like that. All of a sudden, there's that one person in the audience that gets it, and then everyone else tags along.
It's beautiful. There's no better feeling than somebody picking up what you're putting down.
There's no question that when you can get through to somebody on whatever it is, it's like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool.
It's like, I'm not screaming into the wind. How exciting.
What was it like to be in the Broadway production of Chicago? Because that was a gigantic hit. And I know a couple of people that went when you were in it and talked glowingly about the show.
I was only in it for a really short time. It's still a big hit. It is still running. I think they just hit 25 plus years on Broadway. It was a dream I never even dared have because it was too big. I first saw that production of Chicago when I was 13 or 14 years old, and I lost my mind and was just like, please let this run long enough that I could be in it, maybe. And it was like the thing that I would audition for the most when I first got to New York, as many times as I possibly could audition for it. And then I kind of like took a break from auditioning for it for a while. I think I went in something like 13 or 14 times and never for Velma because it was just like not for me. Being able to have done that, I still kind of can't believe that I did. It is a role where I feel like I got to do every single thing that I love to do on stage all at the same time, all in one show. And Charlotte D'Amboise was my Roxy, and to be able to do that alongside someone who I had idolized from the moment I even knew who she was, it was a truly wild experience that I never in a million years thought would have happened.
And there's also a lesson to be learned about that where you keep trying and trying and trying and don't give up and stay at it.
Yeah, I mean, I threatened to leave show business like 12 times a day, but something keeps me from entirely quitting. And every now and then you'll get a giant gift like that to remind you that you are a real person and like something you do has resonated with somebody else.
When you initially got the role, who was the first person you called to tell them?
My parents happened to have been in town, and I didn't tell them that I was even going in because I am not a person who likes to talk about auditions because then you're like beholden to people who ask how they were. And most of the time they're crap. But I had a final callback, and they happened to have been in town. So I got to walk into a restaurant that they were at and tell them in person that I had just gotten this job. And that was really thrilling.
Had to be pretty cool.
That was a really special moment.
Your father passed away last year, and I can relate because I lost my mom not that long ago. How hard was it? And when you think about him now, what are the things that make you smile?
He was sick for about a year and change. So we sort of had a year and change to prepare. That being said, nothing prepares you. As you know, and I hate that you know, it immediately is like an administrative headache for months and months and months of getting tax things, and it's admin work and being on hold with a whole lot of customer service people who then apologize. And you're like, I don't know what any of this means. But the things that make me smile, there are certain chords, like if I am listening to music and I know it's a chord that we would have made eye contact on after we both heard it, that makes me smile. If something is unjust to the point of like confused rage, because he would just be like, I don't understand. I don't understand why this is this way. So it's like when I find myself going into that, I simply can't understand place, I feel like he is with me there. But yeah, mostly it's music stuff.
Like yourself, I'm an only kid, and so it's also hard to really talk to anybody because other people, have siblings and they can kind of talk about it and work through it. And it's like, I don't really have anyone that I can talk to like that.
And nobody who's like on the ground with you in the same way. So everybody who is talking to you about their relationship with your parent, there is nobody whose eye contact you can make who had been through the same things that you had been through with those people. So it's just very strange. Also because like it's just you. So there's part of the physical labor piece of it that you're like, this is just me. Thankfully, my mom has an incredible community and an incredible group of friends, and both my uncles live very close to her. So there are always people there with her that have just stepped up in ways that I am continually amazed by. But there are certain nuances of being raised by the people you're raised by. It's hard to explain to somebody who wasn't there with you.
Going through a time of peril or grief, how important for you is getting that moment of levity to crack that smile or maybe get a laugh to help you deal with the situation?
Oh, it's everything. It's everything. That is also very much my dad, is feeling all of the feelings as fully as you possibly can and knowing that whatever it is you're feeling, you know what that is because you know what the opposite is. And it doesn't make anything less true to find something funny. You can still be mired in grief and you can still be sad and confused and overwhelmed. But if the joke hits, take it. I'm talking to my mom about it and she's like, I'm sorry for laughing. And I'm like, no, no, no. I need you to be laughing because then I know that you truly understand what it is. That is one of those not being able to like nudge my dad and make whatever the joke is and know that it would be received the way that I wanted it to be received.
You've probably had this too, where you try to do a joke to somebody else who's going through grief and they look at you like, what is wrong with you? And you're just like, humor will help you get through this.
Thankfully, there hasn't been too much of that. There have been mostly people who get it, but I think that's virtue of being surrounded by a lot of creative people who also would like their jokes to land.
Away from show business, what's a memory that you have with your parents that is something you look back on and are really happy that it has happened?
Our house was always the party house. So I think it's those moments. My parents worked really hard to make sure that their house was someplace people could come and feel safe and feel like they could be the most themselves. So being able to participate in that with them as a unit to learn what it means to let people you love have a soft place to land and being able to do that by feeding them and by throwing a party or by making sure that you're meeting people where they are and trying to give what you have. Those are things that resonate forever.
Was there ever somebody that came over that you said, and this could be looking back with a bit of hindsight too, oh my goodness, so-and-so is in my house?
Yes and no. For some reason, and I don't know what event it was that they were doing, Mark Summers called the house to talk to my mom. And this was like when I was a kid watching him on television on Nickelodeon all the time. And I could not believe that Mark Summers was calling my house to talk to my mother. And that was one of the first times that I like had a little freak out because it was like somebody that was in my context. It wasn't somebody that was in their context. And like, why? This is very cool.
And I think part of doing what you do or what I used to do in sports is being a fan. Like everybody's a fan before they become an entertainer, an athlete. And when you get to meet that person from your childhood, whether you do it in the moment or whether as an adult, it's a pretty cool full circle moment, I would say.
Definitely. I still have yet to meet Mark Summers, but if I ever do.
I once met my favorite NBA player. I actually interviewed him about 20 years ago. And after the interview, I said, forgive me for being a fan here and not being a journalist, but you are my favorite NBA player. And he looked at me straight faced and said, why didn't you pick anyone good?
Perfect. I think everybody feels that way. I want to say like it's an old Lewis Black bit. And if it's not Lewis Black, it's like someone in that ilk. And the bit is basically about how every single person in show business just expects at some point there will be some men in trench coats that show up and they're like, it's time to come with us. Everybody knows now. It's over. And anybody would just go with them. You would just go with them because you're like, all right, yes, of course. So it's over. So it's like anytime the men in the trench coats don't show up, you're like, I guess I've gotten away with it for another little bit.
And you being in New York, that's such a New York thing because it almost evokes a memory of The Godfather.
Totally. You're like, well, okay, everybody found out. So I guess we're done.
From living in New York, what's an enjoyable part for you away from show business that you're able to do that maybe people can't do in a lot of other cities?
I live in Brooklyn Heights, which is a magical neighborhood that I love so much. And one of the best things about Brooklyn Heights is the Brooklyn Heights Promenade, where you can see all of Lower Manhattan, all of the bridges straight up, the Statue of Liberty and Governor's Island. And it is a really, really unique view of the city. And I go down there every time I need to like bring the dog so she can work on her downstay and being calm in a little bit of a chaotic environment. So we try to go there a couple times a week and just sit and look. It's overwhelming. There are definitely places in a lot of cities where a view like that is possible, but there's something about the New York of it that is overwhelming. And the other thing about New York that I love so much is they say New Yorkers are kind but not nice. It's not nice, but there's an efficiency that may come off a little brusque, but it is the fact that like we've all made this pact with each other that we are going to live on this very strange plot of land together, and there's a sense of something needs doing, so we just go do it, that I haven't really seen in a lot of cities. Somebody's struggling with a stroller up the stairs, whoever's in front of them just picks up the stroller and then you move on with your day. I saw somebody have a seizure on the train once, and like every single person snapped into action to help that person until we could get to the next stop where there could be EMS on the scene and all of that. It is the deep community as well as the being able to take in the view of like, oh, that's why we're here.
New York is my favorite city without a beach because I do like the beach.
We got plenty of beaches.
Yes, but not the traditional kind where you can walk for a gazillion miles kind of beach.
Sure.
My favorite thing to do in New York, and I don't care how boring this may sound to others, is just people watch. Because you just watch everybody. Everybody seems to be going somewhere or doing something. And my favorite moment ever was a person in full clown regalia. We're talking the nose, the shoes, the hair, cursing on a cell phone. Because the dichotomy of a clown cursing to me was hilarious.
It's amazing. There's no real way to have personal space. And so your bubble is smaller, but it's almost like if you saw it, no, you didn't.
It's just such an unbelievable place. You can interact with 10, 20, 30 different cultures in 10 minutes and not even realize you're doing it.
It's the only place I ever wanted to live forever.
What was the culture shock for you moving from the LA area to New York? Did you have any bit of a hard adjustment?
I went to college in Boston first, which I found to be like, especially for people who didn't grow up in a major metropolitan area, was like a great kind of starter city. It's like a very doable city for people who had never lived in a city but knew that they wanted to like end up in New York or Chicago or like someplace that is landmass wise larger. But my whole family is from New York. Both of my parents are born and raised in the city. I was the only person who was not from New York for a good long time. So we came every possible school break or vacation or whatever, we came to New York. So I've been coming to New York since I was a literal baby, and it always just made sense to me. It was less a culture shock and more like, ah, finally.
I know you have to go in a minute, but one thing I do want to get in was a one-person show you did called Hero Worship. Could you talk a little bit more about where the idea came from, how it came about?
Well, I can't talk about it without Robbie Roselle, who is a brilliant cabaret artist and Renaissance human and record producer and fixture of the community, who directed it and co-wrote it with me, and Brian Nash, who did all of the arrangements and played and took all of the foolishness that I threw at him and made it work somehow. I think it started mostly because all of my references were so disparate that I kind of wanted one place to put everything that I felt had made me who I was, with being able to give everybody their flowers a little bit and also get to do stuff that would not necessarily think that I loved or wanted to do or was doing. So it's truly foolishness because I talk about, like I was saying, the score of West Side Story being like a biblical text in my family, and also Victor Borge being this towering figure. So I do the entire Chino speech with the Victor Borge punctuation. There is a 7-minute medley where all I do is sing backup vocals because that's what I like to sing. There are songs to this day that I will never learn the words to because I am very busy singing backup and I love doing that. So it's like a full 7-minute medley of me being an idiot singing only backup vocals on really famous songs. There's a whole chunk of family stuff. There's a whole chunk of when my uncles bought me a box full of all of the CDs that were cool at the time because they were worried that I would not end up cool. So I sing some of those songs for them, and it was just sort of a place to put everything and hopefully be able to give it its due.
Is something like that a show you would do again, maybe updating it since it was a little while ago before the pandemic? Would you do something similar like that again in the future?
Oh, definitely. I would love to. It's so specific to like references I have loved that it's not even necessarily something that would need updating, but it's so much work to write those acts and to do them, but it's really fun. And I would definitely do it again.
What projects are on the horizon for you, and where can we look to see you next?
Whenever somebody asks what I'm doing, I like to say my best, because that's all we can do is our best. I am auditioning a lot, and hopefully something is next that's worth talking about. If not, I guess it'll be fine if the men in the trench coats show up to tell me it's over.
Nikka, I want to thank you so much for joining the I Play Too podcast today and talking about your folks, your time in Chicago, your acting career. This has all been fantastic. Thank you so much, and I hope you decide to come back on the show because I'd love to have you.
Thank you so much. Can't wait to be back.